American Gangster movie review. So if you haven't seen it yet, this movie stars Denzel Washington as a famous American gangster, a drug lord. And it's also got Russell Crowe as a policeman who's trying to bring him to justice. So both of them are starring in this movie. It's based on a true story. It's a biopic, and I'm always a sucker for biopics. I love these movies based on true stories. So when I saw this in the DVD rental store, I decided to give it a try. The DVD also has an interesting commentary, director's commentary track, which is worth listening to because the director will comment on all the things in the film that come directly out of real life. And it does sound, based on what the director was saying at least, that they really made an effort to make this movie as accurate to real life as can be. The big problem with this movie, though, is even though I realize it's only accurate to real life, it feels a little bit cliche. It feels like the rise and fall of like a famous drug lord or the rise and fall of a gangster is something we've seen before in other movies. You know, it feels like Scarface, or some of the details feel like The French Connection. It reminded me a lot of Blow, that movie about Johnny Depp, about a rise and fall of another drug dealer. And again, I realize that this is based on a true story, so I mean, if it's cliche, that's just because real life is cliche. But it does feel a little bit cliche at times. That being said, within that broader kind of cliche arc, there are a number of interesting details in this movie. First one is that Frank Lucas, the character that Denzel Washington plays, is a black gangster. So he's on the wrong side of the law, obviously, but he's a black man who managed to achieve a lot of power in his drug empire in the 1970s. And apparently this was a rarity, at least according to the movie itself. Now, I had kind of gotten the impression, you know, that there are all these 1970s blaxploitation movies about Mr. Big or the gangsters or something like that, right? So I had thought that this was maybe much more common than it was, but apparently that's just Hollywood stuff. At least that's in this movie. They make the case that a black man having this much power, even in the mafia world, was very rare. So that's a bit of interest. The other thing which is interesting in this movie, and again historically, is that it's tied directly to the Vietnam War. So Frank Lucas, Denzel Washington's character, heard about the massive drug addiction of the U.S. troops in Vietnam. And then he actually went all the way over to Cambodia to negotiate importing heroin directly from the mafia in Cambodia. And to import the heroin from Cambodia into America, he used the U.S. Army to do it. So his operation was only possible because of the massive amount of troops going back and forth between the U.S. and Indochina. So in other words, all this heroin flowing into the United States during that period, we've got the Vietnam War to thank for it, apparently. The third reason that this film is moderately more interesting than the average gangster film is the amount of official corruption involved. And the fact that it's all true, apparently. And they go into some of this in the director's commentary. So the reason that Frank Lucas was able to get all this heroin from Cambodia into America is he was using the U.S. military to do it. And he was paying off people every step of the way. And he never got into a situation where there was somebody he couldn't pay off. The director mentions this in the director's commentary and says, you know, it says something depressing about human nature. That he had this massive operation running for as long as he did, and that he never had trouble paying off people and finding people who were willing to take the bribes. I mean, it finally did come apart, of course, when the U.S. withdrew from the war in Vietnam. But as long as that operation was going, he was always able to bribe people. And then we get into the New York City Police Department, which is also incredibly corrupt, or at least was in the 1970s, according to this movie. So Russell Crowe plays a cop who's tracking down Frank Lucas, and he also has his own interesting story. Apparently, corruption was so rampant that Russell Crowe and his partner, near the beginning of the movie, find $1 million in an empty car, just $1 million in cash laying around. And rather than keep it from themselves, they turn it into the department. And this was the beginning of the end of their career, because no other policeman would work with them afterwards. So they were ostracized and eventually ended up having to quit the department. The reason no other police officer would work with them is because by turning in the money, they developed a reputation for honesty. And the department was so corrupt that nobody wanted to work with an honest cop, because apparently everybody else was corrupt and they didn't want an honest cop around being able to report on what they were doing. So I found that interesting. And again, Russell Crowe's character, he never snitched on anyone, in the movie at least. He didn't report his fellow cops. Just getting a reputation for honesty was enough in the department at that time to pretty much end his career. Now, in the director's commentary, they do make the point that this was the early 1970s and things are a lot better now, and apparently it's all been cleaned up. I have no idea. I've got no experience working in a New York police department, so I'll take their word for it. Why not? They seem to know what they're doing here. The other interesting thing about this movie, and this is more of a side note, is actor Josh Brolin plays Trupo, a corrupt policeman who's a thorn in the side of both Frank Lucas and Russell Crowe's character. It's an interesting storyline, and Josh Brolin just plays him expertly. Josh Brolin is somebody, he's been in movies for forever. I was looking him up on Wikipedia. He was in the Goonies movies way back in the 1980s. But he was somebody I've not been aware of until recently, and he's been popping up in a lot of movies I've been watching. No Country for Old Men. He was in that. Planet Terror, which I just got done reviewing. He was in that. I've been noticing him in a lot of these movies, and I've been thinking he's been doing a really good job in all of them. So, Hollywood, if you're listening, cast him in more stuff. He is really good. I'm be looking forward to seeing him in more movies, if at all possible. Okay, I'll finish off here.